Welcome back to Sikkim 365 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with Max Olson of The Athletic. Brought to you by Pioneer Steel and Pipe, where customer service is their main focus. And best in metal, steel, and pipe for large or small projects. With 2 locations in Waco and Bryan. Family owned and operated since 1943.
Now, here's David Smoak, Paul Catalina, and Craig Smoak.
Anne-Marie, Levi, Jack, and Garrett behind the scenes with all of what we do, from blowing things out onto social media to putting things up on the site to producing, directing as well. Sikkim 365 Radio, 365 Sports. Paul Catalina, Craig Smoak. I'm David Smoak, and senior national writer Max Olson, theathletic.com, joins us on 365 Sports. I saw your note earlier today about the transfer cycle, and I don't know if anyone follows this better than you do. So what did you learn from all the stats and data, Max?
Appreciate y'all having me on, as always. So I've been keeping a spreadsheet all summer long of every single player that went in the portal in the past year. And then, yesterday was the end of that portal cycle. That's how the NCAA kind of marks it. August 1's the start of a new one. So, then I had a spreadsheet of 2,000 names, and I had to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to learn from all of it. And we put that piece together today for The Athletic. And hopefully it sheds some light for folks who maybe they have some preconceived notions about, sort of the dangers of going in the portal, or how it goes for people, or how good or bad this is to the sport. Tried to kind of just dive into what are the outcomes for players who've gone in the portal over the past year. And, really the big thing we found is, first of all, more than 80% of the FBS scholarship players who've gone in the portal have found homes, which is good to hear. I know that might not sound like a great number to some, but ultimately, a few months ago, NCAA put out a number suggesting that number was 54%, which I knew was inaccurate at the time, and glad we were able to kind of get that figured out. I think that number will keep going up. So 80% finding home. Now, ultimately, about 49% of players who go in the portal end up transferring down, whether that's down to G5, FCS, D2, whatever. That's just kind of how it goes for a lot of players. You have to kind of know where you're at, and hopefully you have good tape and some good connections in terms of testing your luck with that. But, if you're a Power 5 player, 88% of them have found a home so far, with more to come. And really just kind of try to dive into this, position by position, conference by conference, and all that.
Max, I would say that the best part about the portal is that it allows you to find the level that you should be. Now, that's not always the case 100% of the time, but there are cases. I mean, look at Cameron Ward, who's at Washington State now, Jared Verse, who's at FSU, guys who could play, who needed just some tape at playing college football, who could play up, and are, and then there's guys who probably need to be at a different spot and they go down. So while it doesn't swing equally both ways, it's still pretty good.
Yeah, and, of the more than 2,000 players that have hit the portal at the FBS level who had scholarships in the last year, I'm sure a lot of those guys go in thinking that they're going to move up, or thinking that, that if they're at a Power 5 team and maybe they're a big recruiter over, they think, oh, I'm going to have all these schools calling me that used to recruit me when I was in high school, stuff like that. The reality is, just based on the roster spots that are actually available, less than 500 of those 2,000, really about 25% of those guys overall ended up on Power 5 rosters this fall. And so, if you're leaving a situation where you're on scholarship, and look, I certainly understand there's a lot of cases where players are asked to leave or get cut or whatever. There's a lot more of that going on these days. But, if you're walking away from a scholarship right now, you need to be strategic about how you go through that process. And we also learned, you really need to go in November, December, January. That you're going to have a much better chance of actually finding somewhere to go if you do this at the start of the off season, and that's why they're trying to push these transfer windows so that more guys do that. But no, you're right. There's definitely some players that move up who were under recruited in high school, and there are definitely some guys that were over recruited in high school who probably maybe they should be at that G5 level where they can get more playing time and maybe shine.
Max, elsewhere on Friday, we saw George Kliavkoff take the podium and talk about the Pac. It was much anticipated press conference, the last of the Power 5 commissioners, and certainly one that's kind of under the microscope right now. What were your thoughts on what he had to say about, USC, UCLA, the Big 12, further expansion, and so on?
Yeah, it was a fascinating day for sure. I think that, not surprised that George Kliavkoff felt like he had to try to kind of shoot down the Big 12 stuff, put it out there that he feels like, none of his schools are going to be leaving for the Big 12 and try and, talk down on the Big 12 basically and throw in this, these allegations that, Big 12 presidents are reaching out to his presidents, which I'm sure is true. And, I think the term he used was, grenades being thrown here in the past 4 weeks. I get why he's got to take the stance he did. It is interesting to me, though. I felt like he was kind of punching down to the Big 12 and was maybe a little bit afraid to punch up to the Big 10 there a little bit, because that is the league that, he was in an alliance with, who took two of his most valuable members and created this disruption. But it seems like they're not so afraid of schools going to the Big 12, which we'll see if Brett Yormark can pull that off. But I think it's probably the Big 10 he needs to be more worried about.
We've been discussing that throughout most of. Paul was here by himself, not by himself, but on Friday when all of that was going on. But you just kind of discussed exactly what we did to start today's show. Yeah,
you're preaching, and the fact that they're still the threat, Max. Like, I know the Big 12 is the threat right now in front of them, so to speak. Right. But, the reason why they probably will not sign a long-term grant of rights is because the brands that the Big 10 might be most interested in are not going to be willing to sign a long-term grant of rights. Basically, is that right?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I don't think there's any incentive for Oregon and Washington. You could appeal to them of, hey, fine, yeah, we'll do unequal revenue sharing and give you more money if that keeps you here and stuff like that. But no, there's no incentive to sign a grant of rights, especially with just the way this is setting up, where it probably won't even be that long of a TV deal if that's kind of what they're seemingly aiming for. But no, they should. I think they should for sure be fearful of that Kevin Warren might not be done, because the Big Ten, they're probably done here in the next few weeks or months in terms of wrapping up their TV deal and working towards that stuff. But no, if the Big Ten decides that they want to add West Coast partners for USC and UCLA, then they can snap their fingers and do that. The money gap is so great that, there's not really anything holding this Pac-12 together. And I think that is the appeal that Brett Yormark is making to the corner schools, the Pac-12 South schools, that do you want to stay in that league where they're not getting an offer from Fox, and we'll see if they get an offer this week from ESPN, but they clearly want to go to market and pursue, streaming partners and stuff like that in hopes of a big payday. But do you really want to stick around and just wait for Oregon and Washington to bail on you and kill your conference?
Max, that is another interesting thing, is that he can sit there and kind of quietly do it. But with Kevin Warren, last week he was dropping bombs. He wasn't afraid to answer anything. No more automatic qualifiers. I've changed my mind. 16-team playoff. Why the hell not? Let's, we could expand again. I don't know. Who knows what's in the cards? I can't see the future. This is kind of a different thing than we've heard before. Even a guy as bold as Greg Sankey wasn't saying some of those things that Kevin Warren was saying the other day.
Yeah, and that's where I'm sure there's probably – and look, on the media side, obviously we love that when somebody's throwing out stuff like that. But, I think there's probably Kevin Warren still trying to, kind of get the hang of, the gravitas of the position there a little bit. And you got to kind of be careful about you don't often see these guys sort of float out, hypotheticals and stuff like that. It was interesting to see. You're right. He was a little bit more loose than Indy and willing to engage on some of these things that may or may not actually happen. So, the Big Ten position here is interesting. If they can come to a conclusion here in the near future that they feel like adding Pac-12 members is additive. Obviously the white whale here is Notre Dame, but if for whatever reason they decide that it's beneficial to them to add West Coast partners, Pac-12 is in trouble. And it's funny because George Kliavkoff acknowledged these things in his his address on Friday about how important the student athlete experience needs to be, and the travel piece of this is a problem and all that stuff. So, you can make that a lot easier in the Big Ten by taking more Pac-12 schools.
Max, speaking of Kevin Warren and Greg Sankey and others, weird how all of a sudden the playoff might expand sooner rather than later with all of that's swirling around right now. Kevin Warren being open to the idea, and all of a sudden 16 is just a real convenient number for a lot of people, isn't it?
I thought the Greg Sankey response to that last week was pretty telling, that he was just essentially rolling his eyes and saying, yeah, these guys all talk. It's funny how these guys all talk a big game at their media days, but when we actually get in meetings, they hold all this progress up. So I'm sure that he's skeptical that they can actually, rally and put something together here. But no, you're right. It is interesting how that can just turn on a dime there. Obviously, what's become even more clear now is that the Big Ten opposed this because they were looking out for Fox and because they wanted the playoffs to go to market and have multiple partners. And I get that. I mean, obviously Fox just helped deliver them USC and UCLA. So you kind of get the incentives there. But, it is interesting to see kind of the 12 versus 16 talk kind of change here a little bit. I personally, I'm sure I've told you guys, I thought the 12 model was pretty good, but, it seems like there's momentum now on a different idea. And, can they actually execute that before that deadline? I'm skeptical at this point, but yeah, sure. It's definitely encouraging to see a tiny bit of, optimism there in the past few weeks.
Well, it is. I think it's a lesson learned that sometimes when leaders of something say kind of ridiculous things, like the party line on why they didn't want to really get into it was because automatic qualifiers had to be a thing. And then you start thinking of, based on the plan that we saw, when would the situation be that your conference champion was so bad that they wouldn't get in automatically? And like, oh, well, it's just all about TV. That's all it was. And all that.
Yeah.
What if you just said that? Like, look, we'd like to maybe negotiate a better TV deal on this.
Yeah. And I think I would hope that, some of the fundamentals of the 12-team proposal are still there, because I think obviously this has to be about more access, and that has to include more Group of 5 access, because they've got basically none right now, other than Cincinnati making it last year. So I hope you can still protect that in some way. That's why I kind of like the sixth best conference champs, but certainly the AQ issue is going to be a big one here going forward, and that became obvious when the Big Ten made the move that they did in adding to their conference. I think they had a chance to compromise with Greg Sankey, and they blew it. And I don't think he's going to be quite as amenable to compromising on that, because he suddenly has a conference that, just in terms of the brands they have and the level that they recruit at and stuff. I mean, if there's a 16-team playoff, I'm sure Greg Sankey thinks that probably 5 or 6 of the teams in that playoff should come from the SEC.
Man, it's crazy.
If not more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Man, that leads me to something else, but that'll have to be for another time, about just the regular season, and the value of every week mattering versus, if there's a 16-team playoff and you can be 6th place in the SEC and still get in, then what did that week 3 loss matter, But I guess that's a conversation for another time. Max, Colton Vasek, big-time player out of Austin Westlake, just committed to Oklahoma a little over an hour ago. What do you make of this recruiting run that Brent Venables and company are on right now?
Yeah, it's impressive for sure. That was one of those things that, like, you knew Brent Venables was obviously like the right guy for the job in a ton of different ways for Oklahoma. But that is the one area you do wonder, because I think Lincoln Riley, to his credit, as much as people felt like he was, Oklahoma fans felt like he was slipping every year or whatever. He certainly, the recruiting was at a pretty steadily high level since he took over as head coach. And so you wondered, could Brent Venables, is Oklahoma going to be a legit top 10 recruiting program under Venables, who just, obviously hadn't been a head coach before, so you just kind of don't totally know. Or is it kind of more where they were under Stoops, or it's maybe more in that 10 to 15 range towards the end of the Stoops tenure? And I think clearly you're seeing Oklahoma is going to be able to recruit at a top 5 to 10 level here for sure. Love the pieces that they're adding on defense. Colton Vasek's a player that they took out of Austin Westlake. His dad played at Texas, a guy who just visited Texas over the weekend, hung out with Arch Manning for the weekend, and Oregon was really high on his list too. So that's a great win up front for them. They've got some big dudes in this class. They've got a really talented quarterback. Obviously, have Denton Guyer and Jackson Arnold. Love what they're putting together there, and certainly the SEC pitch, I'm sure, probably helps a little bit. But I think there's just a ton of kids that are just really excited about Venables and where they're going.
Max, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Max Olson, theathletic.com college football writer, with us normally on Thursdays, but had to bump it back a couple of days because he was busy and doing things, and including Friday and the column he wrote in the Athletic about the Pac-12.